anything without offending. So now my mouth is in the jailhouse with cases pending. First Amendment, you replaced it, rigged it, dumbed it down. It's not an option. Some of it I understand. Took power from me.
Biggest winner, T-Mobile, still missing on FCC 2.5 gigahertz auction authorization list. Oh, damn. All right, this one is dated January 5th, and it's from Fierce Telecom. Or no, this one is Telecompetitor. The FCC released its second list of authorized winning bidders from Spectrum Auction 108. This auction highlighted the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum, also known as N41 for T-Mobile, and it's basically the white space licenses that T-Mobile didn't own, that they really need to own. And T-Mobile won like tons and tons of licenses. I think like 92% of them. The auction was completed in late August, and the first list of authorized winners was released a month ago. Since then, mum's the word. T-Mobile was the biggest winner in the auction. Winning bids totaled $304 million, and T-Mobile represented over 90% of the licenses won in the auction. Perhaps because of that, the FCC is being extremely thorough in its review. All right, the licenses included in Auction 108 were largely in rural areas. Prior to the auction, T-Mobile already had licenses in the band in many areas, including virtually all major metro markets. The company obtained the licenses when it merged with Sprint, when it had amassed them over the years. 2.5 gigahertz auction were awarded by county level. Individual counties having up to 3 licenses available. T-Mobile won over 7,000 licenses in the auction. Only one other winner won more than 100. Among the other nationwide providers, Verizon won only 12 licenses in the auction. AT&T and Dish did not win any. 2.5 gigahertz band is considered mid-band, which is viewed as supporting the optimum mixture of speed and coverage for 5G. The spectrum is suitable for mobile or fixed wireless use. Other winning bidders were comprised in large part of small providers serving rural areas. Today's authorization list includes 4 small providers, including Farmers Mutual Telephone Company, Michigan Wireless, Northwest Open Access Network, and Rocky Mountain Broadband. All right, guys, here's the situation. The thing about the 2.5 gigahertz auction from the summer and how T-Mobile still doesn't have access to those particular licenses. They really should just let T-Mobile start using them. There's no reason why they shouldn't. I don't know what the holdup is. Something that I've learned about the FCC when it comes to stuff like this, they don't really publicly discuss or disclose details. So I don't know why, and nobody does. I'd also like to throw this out there that because T-Mobile has existing licenses in that spectrum, they already pretty much have all the radios deployed to broadcast it. Right? Antennas and radios are up. So basically, this is going to help T-Mobile go from like 40 megahertz of N41 to like 60 or 80 or 100. And that's good because that can help create more capacity on the network. And that means mobile customers can benefit from that, but I think also it's the T-Mobile Home Internet customer that benefits from that. 40 megahertz of bandwidth is not enough to support fixed wireless. You got to have 100 plus megahertz of spectrum. So yeah, they should clear this and let them start using it. I don't see why not. I don't see how it harms anybody to give them the accelerated access. I don't really see what the issue is. And because they're not telling us publicly what the holdup is and what that process is, we're just over here scratching our heads thinking who's doing what behind closed doors. So it's just kind of annoying, and I don't know. Wish I could be a fly on the wall when they're discussing these things in those meetings. Let's see here. Anything else from this particular story? I did an update video on this. I don't know when was that. Yeah, it was about a month ago, where like some of the smaller companies started getting access for it, and we speculated that possibly, potentially, maybe AT&T protesting this had something to do with it. Again, we don't know if that's true. That's speculative. It's conjecture. We don't know. They're not mentioned in this article, right? Nobody has any information on that. But I would just like to see these licenses get used. I want all licenses to get used. I want T-Mobile to start building out their millimeter wave. I want AT&T to start building out their millimeter wave. I want to see AT&T start aggregating both parts of their C-band in the N77 channel. I want to see Verizon get the rest of its C-band. I want to see all this happening. Nobody wants to just have licenses and nothing's going on. And with government dollars kind of drying up for fiber programs and the BEAD program and all that, fixed wireless access becomes even more important and more mission critical. So getting more spectrum on air is going to be crucial and important. I really want to see more spectrum get cleared. Wouldn't it be great if satellite operators could just accelerate the repack of the rest of the C-band? The FCC could clear the rest of this spectrum, and then we see a bunch of millimeter wave and CBRS and more people getting access to more capacity. All right. Last story here, we're going to keep it with T-Mobile. All right, guys, T-Mobile is an absolute machine. T-Mobile disclosed early preliminary numbers for their Q4. Guys, the numbers are in and they're big. 927,000 net phone subs. 6.4 million postpaid net customer adds for the year. 524,000 home broadband or the T-Mobile home internet customers. I think that puts them now over 2.6 million on the service. T-Mobile home internet is killing it right now, guys. The uncarrier home ISP. Total net customer adds for Q4 was 1.8 million. 6.8 million for the year. T-Mobile now has 113.6 million customers in total. T-Mobile CEO Mike Sievert said, "It's clear that T-Mobile's ability to offer both the best network and value is bringing new customers to the uncarrier and enticing those who join us to stay. And our momentum won't stop as we continue to translate our long-established 5G lead into overall network leadership and execute on our unique growth strategy. We're perfectly positioned to profitably take further market share in 23 and beyond." So they do take their market share. That is true. Just a couple of things to pick on, though. All right, number one, T-Mobile does not have the best network. They have the smallest network, right? National, they have the least amount of covered miles. So you can't really have the best network if you don't have at least the biggest network. Because if you don't have the biggest network, that means you have holes in your network. And that means you have competitors that are much more available. So say, for example, you're on a trip and there's like a 20-mile stretch while you're driving where T-Mobile doesn't have any native coverage. You may or may not have data to connect to, right? So your music might disconnect. The video that you're watching might buffer or stop playing. Then you're going to be like, oh, well, T-Mobile network sucks, right? Like, I didn't have coverage for 20 miles. That's the type of situation where you'd say, well, T-Mobile definitely doesn't have the best network because it doesn't have at least a competitively large network. 90+% of people, at least 90% plus people, won't be in that situation, which I think is why T-Mobile still grows. It's the fact that most people don't have to have the biggest network. They just need a competitive network that's almost as big, right? And within their typical market usage, where they go to work and where they go to their friends' homes and whatever they do, the network's mostly there, and they grow because of that. But we have to call a spade a spade. There's no part of the T-Mobile network that makes it the best if it doesn't have a comparable size to their competitors. They don't. Their network's not as big as AT&T's. FirstNet really helped catapult AT&T in that area. And then Verizon historically has had the biggest network. So, they consumed a bunch of regional players. They built out a huge, massive footprint, Meanwhile, the other carriers were lollygagging. They just couldn't match the spending of the money and those types of things. So it's really hard to say that T-Mobile has the best network if it has the smallest network. That's probably the biggest issue with that. It has a pretty capacitive network. It's a very modern network, where they've completed all of the Sprint integrations, and then where they've done all the N41, N71 upgrades. It's a really fast network, which I think when he says things like, when you're with us, you get the perfect value and the best network with the value together. I think that's where he's kind of looking at this is we have a 5G lead, right? He says we've got network leadership. They got a 5G stimulus package from the T-Mobile and Sprint merger. They basically were given the opportunity to build out a mid-band 5G network when nobody else could. Meanwhile, AT&T and Verizon were waiting for spectrum and spectrum auctions. They didn't have all that dedicated mid-band. All their bandwidth was stuck on LTE, right? There was nothing they could do except wait for spectrum auctions. Part of that responsibility is on the FCC, and part of that responsibility is on the DOJ, right? And that's okay. I don't have a problem. I'm just calling a spade a spade. It is a 5G stimulus for T-Mobile. In the long run, if T-Mobile didn't get the merger, we wouldn't be having these conversations right now. You couldn't say that T-Mobile has a 5G lead. They'd have 10 megahertz of N71 nationwide. But because of the merger, they've got 10 megahertz of N25, 15 megahertz of N71, and 140 megahertz of N41. All that because of the merger. Sprint stopped investing in its network. Sprint wasn't competitive. Sprint's parent company stopped investing into the network. They stopped competing. We got the best thing that could have happened. The T-Mobile and Sprint merger was the best thing that happened to wireless networks. It forced Verizon to accelerate its upgrade plans. It forced AT&T to do more. It's the best thing to happen in the wireless network. The T-Mobile and Sprint merger is great. Hey, appreciate you, John. Thanks for stopping by. Yeah, I've said time and time again, the best thing to ever happen with the FCC was them clearing the merger. And I remember talking about this with Moose, and it was the state attorney general from New York. It was Letitia James who said, we're going to fight this merger. And Xavier Becerra in California, they opposed the merger. And it turns out that they were wrong. They said, it was going to be horrible for the consumer. Well, it's not horrible for the consumer. It ended up being horrible for the American worker. A lot of layoffs and job cuts and people getting fired and store closings and redundancies and eliminations. That's all true. The American worker was negatively impacted. But the American consumer was positively impacted. We got our first super chat of the night. Big shout out to South Joe. Thank you for the $5 super chat. He said, T-Mobile is great for me when I get into the city from my house. A lot of people say it's great in the city. I don't think many people have too many problems with T-Mobile in most metro areas. And even in suburban, they've gotten a lot better. I think the trouble is when you get off the beaten path and in those places, hilly, mountainous areas, it's like it's AT&T country, it's Verizon country. They thrive there. AT&T because of FirstNet and Verizon, legendary extensive LTE network that's been built over the last 10 years, 12 years, and consuming all those regional carriers and stuff like that. Hey, Brian, I hear you, man. The American worker is the American consumer. I get it, man, but not everybody worked for T-Mobile and Sprint. Let's see what else they say here. So the quality of the net ads. Hey, T-Mobile is saying that people are taking the Magenta MAX plan. That should help them. It allows them to become more profitable. Hopefully it's helping their margins. People like the value. I don't see any numbers given here. Look, if I got the opportunity to ask these executives questions, here's what I would ask T-Mobile. How many customers do you have on Magenta MAX? You've got 114 million customers. How many are on Magenta MAX? Question number 2. How many free lines have you given away? Because I would want to distinguish when you talk about net adds, how many of those net adds are organic paying customers and how many are just free lines. Because like if you add 900,000 net adds and 600,000 are paid, like 1/3 of them are free. It's not the same as having like, 800 or 900,000 real net adds, So that would be my questions. I would ask, how many people are on the Magenta MAX? And then how many of the lines are free? And I also think another question that's important to ask T-Mobile is, what's the churn rate on the T-Mobile home internet? Those are some of the things that I would want to know. And actually, if I was going to ask Verizon questions, here's what I would want to know. Hey, Verizon, how many customers are on your Welcome Unlimited plan? How many customers are on your iPhone plan? And what is your churn rate on the Verizon home internet? Those would be things I would want to know. Big shout out to longtime supporter, friend of the channel, Gene, with the super chat. He said, Verizon has been great here. And I think, Gene, if I remember correctly, you're on the East Coast, aren't you? On the Atlantic seaboard, I believe. Tech Guy 32 says, I agree, the free lines need to stop. Maybe adopt what Verizon does. Will they offer a free device spread out over 36 months, but the customer is paying for the additional line? Antonio says, it makes the shareholders happy to hear big numbers. It does. But I think at some point, even the investors have to say, hey, look, we see all these free ads, we see all these net ads. Why aren't the margins improving by greater numbers? Why isn't the revenue accelerating faster? AR says, forget Welcome Unlimited. The future is with Visible. Dump the stores. People like stores, man. Bryant says, good point, Sneed, but I think that's what the AG in New York was referring to, the layoffs. T-Mobile promised to grow jobs. They clearly lied, but I guess people don't care. People do care, Bryant. So what T-Mobile's doing is kind of tricky. What T-Mobile has done is they have fired and done layoffs, and then they go into rural America and they do that like Heroes program where they give like local area people jobs. The problem is they'll lay off like 2,000 and then hire 300. They'll lay off 1,500 people and then hire 100 people, right? So it doesn't add up. It's still a net loss.